everybody, welcome back to Spilling Tea Book Club. I'm Russell.
And I'm Ryan. And today we're going to talk about The Living is Easy by Dorothy West.
Book 1 of 2021, Ryan. Can you believe it?
I can't believe it. We're already in February. And the first book is over.
Oh, goodness. And let's be honest, this book has got some stuff to unpack.
I'm really glad we read this because it's Black History Month, and we read kind of an unknown figure, Dorothy West, from Black literature even, I think. And I didn't know anything about her before we chose this. I think this was a recommendation by one of our members to check this out. So I'm so glad we did. Dorothy West was born in 1907 in Boston. Her father was the Black Banana King of Boston, which you can see there might be some autobiographical elements in this book if you've read it. He was a former slave from Virginia. And so it's crazy to me that this woman's father was a slave.
Yeah.
It seems so long ago, and it really wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
It was just so recent. But she went to Boston University and the Columbia University School of Journalism for her degrees. In 1926, she wrote a short story and tied for second place with somebody you may have heard of, Zora Neale Hurston. So,
her?
Yeah. So she went on to write some big books and quite popular. I mean, this was a pretty prestigious prize from the National Urban League. This might interest you, Russell. She was an extra in the original stage production of Porgy and Bess in 1927.
I read that too. I love that about her. That is crazy.
She sounds so fascinating. So she moved to Harlem, right before she wrote the short story and was in Porgy and Bess and everything. But then the Depression hit and she was out of money. She and 20 other Black artists and intellectuals traveled to Russia in 1932 and were going to film a movie there. But when they got there, they're like, oh, we're not filming that anymore. But she liked Russia and hung out there for a year. And the only reason she returned was because her father had passed away. Mm-hmm. So she comes back from Russia. She's in Harlem, and she's part of this emerging Harlem Renaissance. Her contribution is mainly this literary magazine called Challenge, where she published essays and stories by Ralph Ellison and Richard Wright, who were huge people in the movement. She knew Langston Hughes because they had both traveled to Russia together and from Harlem. And she asked him to marry her, and he declined, which I thought was interesting. Langston Hughes, I believe, was rumored to be gay.
Yes.
Or have some homosexual relationships. As far as I can tell, Dorothy West never married. So maybe she liked ladies. It's interesting to think, but I couldn't find anything about that, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But she did say single. She wrote The Living is Easy in 1948. It's her first book. It was out of print for a number of years, and then the feminist press republished it in 1982, and that's, I think, the copy I have.
Yes.
And then your copy was just recently published in November of last year.
Yes.
And I love your cover, by the way.
I do. I love it too. It's fantastic.
It's beautiful. And so she kind of had her own revival of recognizing her place in the Harlem Renaissance. She didn't write another novel until 1995, which was The Wedding, which I actually have here. I got this from Book Outlet. It's a really small one, so I thought I'd get it. And she wrote that in 1995. She was really discouraged by it, and she was inspired to continue by somebody else you may have heard of named Jacqueline Onassis, who was an editor in New York and her neighbor. And so she helped publish it. The Wedding is actually dedicated to Jackie Onassis. So they must have been close. Then Oprah, we just need to acknowledge Oprah's role in women writers, because I don't know what we would do without her right now. Like, she's single-handedly like promoting so many Black women. But she produced a mini series based on the wedding in 1998. And then in 1998, Dorothy West passed away at the age of 91. So she left a very eventful life, and she did some crazy stuff and knew some amazing people. And when she asked what she wanted her legacy to be towards the end, she responded, that I hung in there, that I didn't say I can't. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, for a woman that I had heard of Dorothy West, but I didn't really know a ton about her. And then when you start to dig into the life that she led, it's sort of like Zora Neale Hurston. When you start to see what these women lived through and did, it is amazing. The afterword in the version that I have is written by a woman named Adelaide M. Cromwell, who I don't know personally, but she was neighbors and met Dorothy West in Martha's Vineyard, where Dorothy West sort of settled down, where probably ran into Jackie O and all of that. And she had Dorothy West come to her university and give a speech or give a lecture on the Harlem Renaissance. And I love what it says in here. It says that she knew Langston Hughes, Lang, as she called him, County Cullen, always County. Like, she knew these people that are literary superstars, and she had like nicknames for them. So it's like so crazy that she just sort of disappeared from the world of literature. And then thank goodness Oprah and Feminist Press. And mine has a foreword by Morgan Jerkins, who I absolutely love. So it's just great to see this sort of coming back.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so fascinating. Well, I'm so glad we read this book, and I'm so glad we got to know her, and hopefully we'll introduce more people to her through this video and the book club.
Absolutely. So as you guys know, Ryan has talked about Dorothy, so I get to talk about the plot of the book. And like Dorothy, this book has so much going on. So we are going to do our best not to spoil here today. So I'm going to keep the plot summary very, very brief. But this is really the story of Cleo. She is a young Black woman from the South who moves to the North to marry a man who is much older than her. And really, it's the story of her relationship with money, the Boston Black community, and her family, and sort of how she's always striving to sort of raise the bar for her family, get recognition, get herself up into this upper class of the Black community in Boston. She has a large connection to her sisters that she grew up with, and a lot of the book is about her bringing her sisters from where they are on the East Coast all to her house in Boston so that they can all live together again. And this book has so many different layers, but it really is Cleo's relationship to going from poverty to sort of middle class and a drive to continue up the economic ladder, and sort of her place in this society, this Black society in Boston, who has a lot of stuff about colorism and a lot of white passing Black people, and sort of her space in all of that. And then her relationship with her husband, as Ryan said, her husband is the Banana King of Boston, which is very autobiographical of her father. And sort of their very complicated relationship. I don't even know where to start other than to say, I will start with Cleo is one of the most complicated characters I have ever read, because she does a lot of stuff that makes you just dislike her. But there's a lot of motivation to look behind it. Yeah, how did you feel about Cleo and how sort of she's represented?
So when we meet Cleo, we get kind of her backstory. You know, she was sent north to Boston from the South. She, like, when she was 14, like, she never saw her mother again. Like, she was on her own. She had to make her own way. And we get kind of her story of how she comes to Boston. Then we get her life as a wife, and she's trying to move into this 10-room house in a nicer neighborhood in Boston. hopefully by, I think, closer to the white people.
Yes.
And so the first thing we really hear from her is that she negotiates a $25 a month rent from the landlord, but then changes the receipt with a pencil and tells her husband it's $45 a month.
Yes.
I think that was brilliant. That showed all we need to know about Cleo. So she's lying, she's underhanded, but she's making her own way in 1914 Boston as a Black woman. So definitely very complicated.
What I thought was very interesting, and one of the themes throughout the book, is Cleo's relationship to money, because to her, like, she wants to get money, but she's also hoarding money. So she's always trying to find ways to manipulate her husband to give her more money than she needs so she can put money away to buy other objects to sort of lift her in the view of people. And who those people are is sort of not even really said. It's just, in general, she wants to look better in society. And I thought it was really interesting for a woman who was so focused on money, how little she knew about how money was made, and didn't really understand her husband's business or what the backdrop of it all. She just thought because he possessed money, he must be rich, and she needed a part of that. And I thought that was really interesting because money plays such a part with her relationship with a number of people in the book.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, back then, I assume, women weren't able to manage money the way they are now. Like, women probably weren't able to own property in Boston at the time. They probably weren't allowed to have bank accounts, especially a married woman. And so there was no opportunity for her to understand how money worked. That wasn't her world, but she was trying to live in it and like maximize her opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to fault her, though she really did some bad things to people, really kind of selfish things. So yeah, it was very interesting, her relationship with money.
Yeah. Well, and we should say, I don't know that I said this, but this book starts about 1914, so around World War I. So that's the time period that we're in. And the US, the world is entering World War I, and World War I changes every war changes economics. But she doesn't really see that that's coming, and not that she would, but her husband is sort of trying to figure out how to understand it as well, because everyone sort of knows it's happening, but what effect is it actually going to have on this community in Boston? And Dorothy West is brilliant, and it's always in the background, but it never makes itself known, like just in your face. It's very subtle, and she does that part very, very well.
Yeah, I think there were even some funny moments where they like joke about, well, it's not like it's gonna last longer than the summer. And like, writing this in the 1940s, we know what happens with World War I and World War II. So like, there was a lot of, I think, like really kind of dry, subtle humor throughout the book. I wouldn't say laugh out loud, but there was definitely a witty tone underneath some of this.
Yes. And one of the things also that Cleo does is she wants to rent this 10-bedroom house. She sort of sells it to her husband that they'll get boarders, right? So that will help offset the cost. But in reality, she has no intention of getting boarders. She wants her 3 sisters to move from their husbands, leave their husbands behind, and move to Boston, bring their children, and live with her. That's sort of her goal. And then we get another flashback where we learn about her relationship with her sisters. And even as a young child, Cleo was a manipulator. She manipulated her family, she manipulated her sisters, and she was a risk taker. That is also something that's very clear throughout the book. Even as a child, she was a risk taker. And that's another very conflicting part of the book, because she loves her sisters, but she wants to rip them away from their families to come live with her. And there's a lot of dynamic to that sets you up for a lot of interesting discussions about family and choosing family, and also the relationships between men and women.
Yeah, I think a lot, one of the biggest themes is like women's independence and how their destinies are very strongly tied to men, regardless of what they want, you know, based on what their husband does, based on what their husband's business is, the husband's money situation. Like they're always at the mercy of their husband or the men in their life.
Yeah, and I don't think that this is, you know, Cleo's relationship with her husband is very tied to money in a lot of ways, and he's much older than her. They have one child together, and she sort of, her mindset is that if she brings her sisters there, they'll be happier because of the life she can give them. But as we learn about her sisters, I never felt that they were unhappy in the lives that she wanted them to leave exactly. They weren't rich, that, you know, they definitely had money problems, but they had good relationships. They loved their children. They struggled, but it was very interesting, the dichotomy of the idea of money will make you all happier versus just living a life that you're happy without money.
Right. Yeah, and even towards the end, one of the aspects that I like is that Cleo was kind of a fixer. Like people brought their problems to her and she would figure it out and she would make things happen. And so I liked that about her. I almost feel like she was an anti-hero in a way that she wasn't doing things that were necessarily moral, but she was doing what she had to do to survive.
Mhm.
And I got kind of like flashes of Olivia Pope and Scandal,
Oh,
as
I could see
as
that.
weird as it is, but like, you know, she's not a great person, but you're rooting for her in many ways. And she's solving people's problems. And I felt Cleo was really the same in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And what the other aspect of this novel is the Black Society of Boston that Cleo is in, and we meet many different characters. She has a friend, Althea, who goes by Thea, who is from a family that was very wealthy that lost their money, and her brother who wants to start, who's got this newspaper for the Black community, but it's not really taking off. And we learn how she's also part of that group and how she's asked to fix things in that circle as well, and how she plays off of people. She's very smart.
Yes.
And smart in almost a conniving way, but
Mhm.
she does the right things for a lot of people, and everyone appreciates it, but also in the same time wouldn't do it themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's like they could. Like some of these things I'm like, well, just go talk to this person yourself. Why does this have to be like a scheme? But and yeah, totally.
Yeah. Um, well, so I do want to talk about a character that comes up later just because I was fascinated by her.
Mhm.
And that's the Duchess. So the Duchess is a white passing Black woman who runs this house where gambling takes place, but only like her main goal in life is to become like a part of this society, this upper class where she's always sort of been on the outside, even though she has the most money of all of these people.
Mhm.
And I thought she was really fascinating.
Yeah. I wonder if she's based on a real person. She was one of the most interesting characters in this book. And, you know, she did things like she promoted gambling, and at first she didn't take any money from the gambling. She just kind of put it there. And then she took money from people who could afford it or who might not be as good. And then she did it from other people. And so kind of like she kind of was um she had her own justice within this like gambling community, and it was fascinating to see her story. I wish we would have gotten more of her.
Yeah, and I don't want to ruin it, but her backstory, what her life was before we meet her, is so interesting and makes her so complicated.
Yeah.
I loved it. I did not find out that she was based on anyone, but Althea and Simon are actually based on real people. Simon is based on a man who went to I think he went to Harvard and started newspaper for the Black community in Boston. And, you know, we already talked about her father being the person that her husband was based on. So it's like Dorothy West does steal a lot from, you know, what was actually going on and made these people part of her book. And she made them very interesting.
She did. And if she would have been, if she was born in 1907, and this book took place in 1914. So she would have been 7 in 1914. And that was about the same age as Judy, Cleo, and Bart's daughter, which makes you wonder how much of this was autobiographical. And if Cleo was her mother, I don't know if she has very good feelings towards her mother.
Yes.
Because it was not necessarily a flattering portrayal.
Yes. Well, and that we can sort of go into another theme in the book, and Cleo is sort of the epitome of it. And this would be interesting if it's something she got from her mother. Cleo has a very distinct idea of the difference between a Boston Black person and a Southern Black person. Yeah. And she has I'll call it almost a caste system for the way that the people are organized in her mind. The reason she really wants to move is because the community that she starts in is being, all of these Black people from the South are moving there, and she does not want anything to do with it. And that sort of internalized racism within the community is something we've seen in a number of books that we've actually read for the book club. But Cleo is the most in your face about it.
Yeah, I mean, this book touched on so many issues and themes. Just among that, it wasn't a deep dive, but we realized that there's tension between the Black community that was kind of welcomed in Boston as, you know, probably post-Civil War. They're like, we're abolitionists. We believe in equality, kind of. And then there was the Great Migration, with which all these poor Black people were moving north to find these jobs. There was also the Irish moving in at the same time. And there were very unflattering statements about the Irish. I mean, some of them were, we are fine with renting to you because you're a light-skinned Black person. We just don't want to have anything to do with these Irish people, which was fascinating, like all of these dimensions.
Yeah, Dorothy West's novel is so complicated on the dive into race as a theme, because she's got so much going on in this book that you could dissect all these different aspects of her thoughts on it. And I don't even know maybe if it's her thoughts, it's maybe her observations of how society in Boston was when she grew up, and, you know, maybe even into her teen years and to her young adulthood. You know, there's a lot of talk about how the Irish were treated when they got here. And, you know, that she just touches on it is enough to let us know that she recognizes the commonality, but also how they were almost pitted against each other a lot of the time. It's very interesting.
It really is. And I think another interesting aspect is the feminism of the book, which I think is a little more subtle, but probably more pervasive for this book. And the whole time I read it, I was thinking, what would we say about Cleo if she was a man?
That is a fascinating idea.
I mean, like, you know, if you have like a Great Gatsby around the same time, like he's kind of, you know, like cool and he's a hero and stuff. But I feel like a lot of people are not going to have a very good opinion of Cleo at the end of this book, which is fair. But I wonder how much is filtered through a patriarchal lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of things that Cleo did that I didn't agree with or didn't like. I think my biggest struggle with her as a character was how she treated a family her sisters didn't know how to deal with her. And some of the stuff she did to them just made me sort of angry that she would treat family that way. But you cannot doubt that she was driven. She loved her family for whatever way that was. And she was smart because she was going to And she was a bit lucky, you know, things work out in different
Mhm.
ways in this book, and some of it just falls, and you're like, you know what, she's worked hard, so give her that, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, she's a very complicated character.
Yeah, so complicated. I really like this book, but I do have to say my biggest problem was I don't think it's very well written. It does have a lot of those first book qualities where I feel like she threw everything plus the kitchen sink into this book, and it could have been streamlined. I also thought a lot of the sentences were clunky.
Yeah.
And that's hard to say because, you know, she didn't have the same opportunities as a white man writing at this time. She did go to Columbia, she did go to Boston University, so she was educated. I just thought maybe this should have some editing. You know, some of the paragraphs, I was like, what is happening? And she would refer to people and then like explain it later. And so it was kind of out of order, I thought. So that was my biggest hang up with the book.
Yeah, I agree. There were some times that I felt like a sentence had either like it was, I don't know how to say it. It was a bit too long. Like it was like I didn't need all the adjectives, or I didn't need all the adverbs, or I didn't need as much about it just to get the idea across. And it almost, I really feel like the first couple chapters were really hard to get into. I struggled at first with this book because I didn't think that the writing was compelling. But what
Mhm.
happens is a couple of chapters into it, the story takes over and the writing becomes secondary, and you're able to see past it because so many of the characters are fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're struggling with this book, try to get to chapter 4. That's where it really picked up for me, and that's where I really got interested. And I thought the book flowed much better after that.
Yes, I still I agree with you. I think that there are parts throughout the whole book where, and it was 1940s, and I bet she didn't have an editor like, you know, anyone else, right? You know, any white man writing in the 1940s had.
Yeah.
Someone could have helped her sort of smooth some of it out. But she definitely has a way of turning a phrase or telling you enough about something to compel you to keep reading.
Mhm.
That's why I'm fascinated to read The Wedding, because I
Mhm.
wonder what she developed into as a writer. So
Yeah. I mean, this seems like it has a lot of the same themes, and also this is lauded as a very witty novel. And I think she has some wit in her social commentary
yeah.
that may not have come through as well in The Living is Easy. So I am interested in reading this also.
Yeah. It's funny because she was born in 1907, and my great grandmother was born in 1907 as well. And I remember she passed away when she was 96. So I feel like they were very close in age.
Yeah.
And I remember her talking, she was from a very poor farming town in Iowa, and how different the world was by the time she passed. The world for Dorothy West between writing her first book and writing her second book were two completely different places. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
fascinating to me.
It is fascinating. The other thing is that I thought of the street a lot while reading this. You know, they're kind of at similar times, you know, women trying to make it. The stories are different. But I also thought, how much has not changed?
Yes.
You know, again, like these women are still dealing with the same problems today.
Yes.
And so even though the world is totally different, it's not a different situation necessarily for a Black woman. And that is really fascinating to me.
I mean, you could do a case study and read The Living is Easy, set at World War One, The Street, which is set in the 1940s, right? And then The Women of
Mhm.
Brewster Place, which is set in the 80s, and
Mhm.
watch how much hasn't changed as the women in those books deal with the same things by three very talented writers.
Yeah.
Showing very different views of very similar situations in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. So, yeah, that is a really interesting idea. Yeah. For a book that I, in the beginning, thought I wouldn't get through, by the end of this, I'm a Dorothy West fan.
I am too. The beginning was really tough. I was really struggling, but I'm so glad we read this. It's
And
such
it ends with a kicker.
Oh, it does. I don't think anyone will expect where this goes. So
that's the thing. Like, there's like the part 2 is very short, but a whole heck of a lot goes down in it. Things change, and you're like, what's going on? And then you're like, oh, goodness gracious, Dorothy West.
Yep.
So, well, I am really glad we read this.
Me too.
Want it. I just love this copy. I think this book just needs to be like a poster in my office.
It does.
So Dorothy West, The Living is Easy. How many teacups are we thinking, Ryan?
I think I would give this 4 teacups. I think the book is great. I love the themes. I love the exploration. There were so many interesting characters. I didn't know where this was going. The writing just could have been a little clearer for me.
I agree. I've been thinking about it all day, and I was like, it's like a 3.5, 4-ish. So I'm going to go with 4 because it is a first novel, and I think we have to give that to her. And especially at the time when she was writing, the support that she would have had. But she can tell a story.
Yeah, she can. And I want to encourage people to read this because it's not a story that gets told often, but I think it's worth exploring, and it's not a difficult read once you get into the main plot about
well, and let's support Feminine Press, which is an amazing small independent publisher that does some great work bringing these sort of lost books to the forefront. They are fantastic. So if you guys do have a chance, I'll try to remember to link them in the description box below. But I really, really think they do amazing work. So if you want to join our book club, we are meeting. So today is about a week before. We are going to meet with our book club on February 13th for our Zoom call. And if you want to join, just email either Ryan and I. Our information is down below, and we will get you on the list. We're really excited. We've had some good response. This book club, it may be pretty big this time if everyone shows up. So
yeah. And then our next book is going to be Bread Givers by Anitzia Zierska. I might need to get a pronunciation before that. But this is about a Orthodox Jewish family in New York City in the 1920s. So
yes,
we're
my
staying
Polish
in
is awful too.
We're staying in the same kind of time period. We'll be in the Northeast again, so it'll be interesting to see what it's like for a Jewish woman during this time. And I'm excited to read that.
And that one was recommended to us by Robin in our book club. So we are excited to read that. So yeah, exciting.
Yeah. So if you can't join in February, this will be our March book club selection. And you can see all of the books that we'll be reading in the future. If you ever want to join for just even one event because you're curious about a book, feel free. Just let us know and we'll get you on the list.
Absolutely. And Brian and I did a video in January that outlined all the books that we're reading in 2021. You can join for 1, you can join for 11. We'll be happy to have you. Ryan, I have to say, we are going to have some stuff to talk about next week.
I wish we could have like a more spoilery discussion, but we don't want to do that here. So if you want to get the real scoop, I think you need to join the book club and come to our meeting because I think it'll be a juicy discussion.
Absolutely. Well, Ryan, thank you for being here. And thank you guys for watching. We're loving doing the Spilling Tea Book Club. And until next time, it's bye from me.
Bye.